Hey all and welcome- no, that's not the one. Hello all and welcome to Style Rank, the thing I'm doing now because I meant to start it with the Shinada video, but then that one took so long that I decided to make it about why Shinada is pretty much the best thing of all time instead. Plus, now giving the agent video that title looks somewhat planned out in advance instead of just being lame clickbait. I still stand by everything I said in that video. If you like Nishtani, you're a rock apologist. Most of what I said in that video, but when I realized I wanted to talk about more gameplay styles, I knew I would need a semi-regular format to work with. Without one, I can't draw people in with the promise of a big-ass list! That's right, baby, in this series I'm going through every playable style in the Yakuza series, and ranking them based on 4 key factors: presentation, utility, fun, and LNS, ludonarrative synchronicity. It wouldn't be a Maxwell Painwell joint without a bunch of big words. To give you an idea of how this is going to work, here's how I'd apply these evaluations to agent style, and here's how they'd look for Shinada's style. Then, as you can see, we can definitively rank agent as the worst style in this series, and Shinada as the best. Got it down? Perfect. Now let's shift focus to today's subject. Oh, actually, spoiler warning for Yakuza 4. It was brought to my attention that seeing so much story talk in the Shinada video was a bit of an unwelcome surprise, and I apologize for that. Some people want more of it, some want less, so I decided that making it a factor on which I'll judge each style was a good enough middle ground. So it will be brought up where it matters, but it won't comprise an entire chapter of discussion. That'll be left to its own eventual video. Anyways, today's subject. Something that's always intrigued me about the Yakuza fanbase is that certain opinions seem to be held in a contrarian sort of light, even though they're not really contrarian in nature at all. For example, you'll see a lot of people dogging on Yakuza Kiwami 2 for several reasons, most of which are warranted, but once the conversation around the PS2 games being as good as, if not better than, the remakes came into notoriety, a lot of people started acting as though they were making a huge statement by proclaiming their dislike for Kiwami 2. The reasons may have changed, but believe me, this game has always had its haters. You want to see a real contrarian? Try and outperform the dude who says Shimano is the best villain in the series. Now there's a man with some gumption. He has all of my respect. As you may have guessed by now, another supposedly contrarian opinion is finding Tanimura's gameplay the most fun in Yakuza 4. Hell, just liking it is treated as a somewhat hot take. Granted, I'm not on Twitter or Reddit, so I'm not overexposed to the kinds of people who think Yakuza 4's story is bad because of rubber bullets and only like the game because Akiyama's in it. It may be that in those circles Tanimura gets some hate, but even then I find that a little hard to believe. Part of it is because I've seen proof that he has his own crowd, but most of it is just that I don't believe he's divisive enough for people to hate. Story is one thing, but in gameplay, Tanimura is absolutely no slouch. He's got a very solid combat system, one that at times works very well in Yakuza 4, but at others feels like it was forced into the game without a mind for the situations where it works best. He's an interesting case, one I've been very excited to dissect. As usual, chapters are on screen, probably not as many as the past couple times, and also unlike the last couple of times, there will be no live commentary in this video. With 5, I didn't want to spend the extra time complaining about the game in a scripted format, plus I wanted to challenge myself to complain about it only via memory. But for Yakuza 4, I'm happy to write about it, and I am genuinely going to be better off having my thoughts a little more organized this time. All of that said, let's get into it. Unlike most other Yakuza protagonists, Tanimura presents a bit of a mystery on the surface. It's not immediately obvious what he's about, made all the more confusing given his, shall we say, distinct introduction in the game's opening. He shows up, manhandles a corpse, name-drops Sugiyuchi, who will show up later, and then disappears for hours. So by the time you reach part 3 and realize you'll be playing as him, it's fair to be more than a little thrown off. In terms of visuals, his wardrobe is one of the more confusing designs in the series. It's not a suit, for one, but more than that, it doesn't make sense for him to be wearing it. Tanimura is on community safety. He patrols the area he's assigned to, and ideally, he's immediately recognized as a police officer. You might be able to recognize him as a cop by his radio and his service weapon, but that would take scrutiny at best, and at worst, it means you committed a serious crime because you didn't realize there was a cop in front of you. His outfit is antithetical to the very idea of community safety, and that's why it works so well. One of the most important things you have to consider with Yakuza 4 is that the game is aware that Tanimura isn't a good person, or if nothing else, that he isn't a good cop. Akiyama's intro makes it perfectly clear, and even if it didn't, Tanimura's first chapter shows him getting chewed out for strolling into a crime scene and getting his prints all over a dead body. He gets introduced by the game itself as the parasite of Kamurocho, which would be true regardless of his character just by virtue of being a cop, but we see him living up to that title in several different ways. So yeah, his outfit isn't very becoming of a police officer, but that's why it works so well for him. It also just happens to look good. I like his coat, and it's cool that his tie is modeled and swings around freely. Classic 7th gen, look at our awesome graphics type of detail. His heat aura is also great. Like I mentioned in the Shinada video, Yakuza 3 and 4 easily have my favorite heat auras in the series. The massive fire surrounding the character is cool enough, but the way it trails behind you as you run, and especially the way it blends with the blue trails of your finishers, all of that really helps sell it as more than just a gif of a fire they glued to the model. Speaking of his finishers, Tanimura is one of the few protagonists in this series whose combat style is pretty explicitly drawn from one inspiration: Muay Thai. Tanimura uses a style of jujutsu known as Taiho Jutsu, literally translated as arresting art. It emphasizes non-lethal means of restraining an opponent, specifically focusing on reducing chance of serious injury. While it's not as widely used as it was in feudal Japan, some techniques are still taught to police officers in the modern day. Of course, Tanimura also draws from some other martial arts, such as Hapkido and other branches of jujutsu, but the most relevant and obvious inspiration is the aforementioned Taiho Jutsu. You can see it in his disarming heat action, as well as in his omnidirectional defensive capabilities, but we'll talk more about that later. Even without that knowledge though, you can tell some of what Tanimura is about just by looking at the top left of the screen. He may have the shortest health bar in the game, but he more than makes up for it with by far the longest heat bar, which allows him to execute a few heat actions in a row without having to worry about building it back up. This game is also one of the more lenient when it comes to how quickly you can use one after another, so you're free to spam them for as long as you can maintain heat. That doesn't sound very technical on the surface, but considering that heat actions themselves are incredible feats of strength and dexterity, I think the description is fitting. This focus on grappling and more technical fighting is complemented by Tanimura's theme, Infinite Handcuffs. Much like the man himself, a lot of what makes this song great isn't what you'll find on the surface. Certainly not while you're playing the game. I'm pretty confident saying that most of the Yakuza games don't have very good volume mixing between the background music, sound effects, and the voices, which has thankfully been addressed in recent entries by letting us decide how we like the game's audio mixed. However, for Yakuza 4 specifically, the audio balance is terrible for one major reason. Every enemy in this game has to be on 5 metric tons of bath salts because they're all screaming so loud and so often that you can barely hear literally anything besides them. Even my first time playing this game, before I actually thought critically about any of the games in this series, I was well aware of how much of a problem this is. It's baffling that they allowed half of these screams to make it into the final product, because in larger fights, it gets genuinely painful. Let's just turn that down a little more. There you go. So now that we can hear it, Infinite Handcuffs is a great song. The super short and staccato notes keep the pace constantly in high gear, even with Tanimura's playstyle often encouraging staying still on the battlefield. Keeps things from feeling too static. The bass line is absolutely bananas, and given its prominence in the song, it's all the more important that you can actually hear it. It pairs with the percussion to form the main melody, which gives the song a super chilled out vibe, and makes it all the more distinct from the other Street Fight themes in this game and in this series. Even when the guitar and piano come in, the song doesn't feel like it's trying too hard to be cool. Once you get to the bridge, though, that's where things get kicked into high gear. If the fight lasts long enough to reach this point, you are going to ascend. So we're nearly done with the aesthetics part of the discussion, but there is an elephant in the room that I'll need to address. For the moment, though, let's ignore it. I'll get to it eventually, but for now, let's turn our attention to what you're all here for. When it comes to playing as Tanimura, things are much less off-putting than his appearances would suggest. Like I've said before, each protagonist in Yakuza 4 embodies an element of Kiryu's style. For Tanimura, that's his technical capabilities. In gameplay, that means that while Tanimura may not have a quick-step cancel like Akiyama or the raw health and damage output of Saejima, he has plenty of defensive options that leave him more than capable of handling anything the game can throw at him, and I do mean anything. This technical ability is seen in something as basic as his stance. He gets the honor of being one of the few Yakuza characters to actually hold both of his hands in front of his face when he's locked on. And I'm aware that it's just the nature of martial arts that some stances don't require that, but it just makes sense to me, and again, it helps set him apart from others. It's also shown in his base combo, 4 punches instead of Kiryu's 3 and a kick. These punches also have much better form than Kiryu's, a lot more control over where they're going, and they can be upgraded to be nearly as fast. Tanimura's finishers offer a lot of diversity in their effects, and all of them are worth using. Square Triangle is a spinning chop that inflicts a spinning stumble into knockdown. Keeps them on their feet for a real long time. You'll get the most mileage out of setting up bounding combos with this, but it does take a bit of effort to aim the enemy properly. It's also a pretty wide move, which means it'll hit multiple enemies around you. 2 Square Triangle is a jumping knee strike that knocks down lesser enemies, staggers big ones. Either way, it usually gives you enough time to get out of dodge before anyone tries hitting you back. 3 Square Triangle is a side kick that crumples the enemy. It's more precise than the spinning chop, but it also doesn't send the enemy away from you, which means that you can more easily combo off it. 4 Square Triangle is a Superman punch that inflicts hard knockdown. The knockdown is so hard, in fact, that it knocks over any enemy, as far as I know. Doesn't matter if they're a sumo dude or a boss, they will fall down. Super helpful. I mentioned upgrading his combo earlier, and one more thing you can do is gain a 5th square attack. It and its finisher, which knocks away, mimic Kiryu's 4 Square Triangle, which reaffirms that while Tanimura may be a more technical fighter than him, he isn't straight out better than Kiryu. He has to work to even approximate the level Kiryu's on. One thing you could argue is better than Kiryu is his dropkick, which granted does look a little wimpy on the surface, but this one leaves you facing the enemy when you stand up. Personally, I prefer Kiryu's leaving you turned around. It helps you reorient yourself in case you miss, but I can't exactly call this a pointless change. It's especially helpful for when the dropkick doesn't actually knock the enemy over. You can get right back into hitting them or blocking. Another point of comparison between the two is that Tanimura can use recovery moves, or stance moves. These were added in Yakuza 3. If you hold triangle as you input a finisher, in this case his 1st, 3rd, and 5th, you'll hold the stance and gain some extra heat. Like I said earlier, a lot of Tanimura's game plan revolves around executing several heat actions in a row, so having a simple and easily accessed means of gaining more heat, even if it isn't very much, is a very welcome addition. Akiyama also has a couple of these, funny enough. The things you'll find when you actually read the tutorials. The rest of his arsenal is pretty standard, at least by Yakuza 4 standards. One heavy kick that doesn't change with lock-on, a reverse heavy, sway attacks that look unique from Kiryu's, a double dodge, a good taunt that fits his reckless, rules-eschewing nature. Given where the story goes later, it's an especially interesting choice. An unfortunate negative is his down attack. I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's stupid to bend over and punch an enemy when you have 2 perfectly good feet. And in Tanimura's case, it takes long enough to execute that the enemy could easily get up while you're doing it. Thankfully, that one sore spot isn't near enough to nullify how solid Tanimura's fundamentals are. Of course, this isn't all of his fundamentals, and while I'd love to maintain this positive attitude going forward, I must admit that the rest of his core kit isn't quite as infallible as what I've covered up till now. It's a technical foul. Shut up, dude. Oh my god. None of what I've talked about so far is what people know Tanimura for. When most people think of Tanimura, one of 2 things come to mind. We should start with the one I'm more positive on. Tanimura has a guard, naturally, but if you time your guard with an enemy's attack, he will instead parry the enemy. This sends the enemy flying away in the opposite direction from which they attacked you, regardless of how Tanimura is facing when he gets his guard up. It's a canned animation, has the same effect every time for every enemy, with one exception that I'll talk about later. Seems pretty simple, and in all honesty, that's because it is. There isn't a diverse selection of options this version of a parry gives you, but what is here is definitely not lacking in utility. The enemy you parry can hit other enemies in your immediate vicinity or in their way as they stumble away from you. And they'll also enter a bounding state if they collide with a wall before they stop stumbling. In most other games in this series, the parry turning your enemy into a projectile wouldn't be super useful, certainly not worth mentioning. But Yakuza 4 is one of the entries where the enemies absolutely love dogpiling you. You're gonna get constantly ganged up on, and if they want to stunlock you right onto the devil's doorstep, they'll be happy to send you on your way. Akiyama and Saejima just kind of have to deal with those situations as they come before now, but with Tanimura, you finally have a consistently viable option that you can use to get out of a sticky situation. The stumble also lasts for long enough to get a hit in on their back, if you're quick about it. It's a small window, but nothing's stopping you from mashing square to make sure you hit it. So not only is the parry a consistently useful defensive option, it also opens up an enemy for a consistent offensive follow-up. Tanimura's other unique option is a special grab, called just an arm grab by the game. Instead of throwing enemies you grab, you put them into an arm lock. From here, you can do a big spinny kick, arm drag and throw them, which can hit surrounding enemies, or bend their arm more. Riveting. So, cool tidbit about these moves, they're all copied directly from Virtua Fighter, specifically Vanessa Lewis in Virtua Fighter 5. They're pretty situational in this game. You need to input grab during an impact from a plain kick, specifically in defensive stance, and specifically on counter hit. Then, you have the same three options, just as directional throws. So many moves from Yakuza come from Virtua Fighter. 5 came out in 2006, which puts it well before every PS3 game in the series, meaning that from Kenzan forward, there's a decent chance that basically any move you see anyone do was potentially copied from a Virtua Fighter game. Oh, also Revo drops on the 26th. Please, 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 for the love of all that's good in this world, keep an eye on that game. Or if you're into the idea, please buy it. Please give it a shot. This series actually has a decent chance of coming back from the dead, and I want to do what I can to make sure that it does. Anyway, I harped on about the Virtua Fighter thing because 1, I like the games a lot, and 2, that's the most interesting thing about Tanimura's special grab. That's it. For all intents and purposes, it's just another grab that you can put enemies into, and it's not even that much better than the normal one. Sure, the throw can hit more enemies around you, but that's literally the only advantage this grab has over the normal grab. Its square option isn't much better or noteworthy in any way, and the triangle option takes longer for not much better of a result than the normal grab triangle. Again, it's just not worth talking about, besides looking good, and that doesn't really account for much when you're in the fray. Oh, and you thought I was done talking about the parry? Absolutely not. Talk about missed potential, man. I know I said its fundamentals are solid, and I wasn't lying about that for the sake of the video structure, but it would have been so much nicer if it was more than fundamentals. It'd be nice to be able to quick step cancel the after frames, but I get that Tanimura isn't really about that. But you know what would have made sense? A special throw from it? I'm imagining something like the parry throw in Legend Remix Gaiden. That would have been awesome. Other button options from it would have also been great. You know, maybe square kicks him to the ground, triangle transitions straight into the special grab. Then what if that were the only way to get into it? You know, you need to use parry to open that up as an option. Then that alone would make the special grab feel more like it belongs in the game at all. That was pretty short. I mean, shit, I guess I can talk about his weapons for a bit. I really like the way Yakuza 4 handles weapons. The limits it imposes helps to both avert choice anxiety and reinforce how capable and badass Kiryu is. Tanimura's options are poles and tonfa, of which the pole gets the new attacks. No beating around the bush for this one, the pole moveset is fantastic. Hits in a wide area around you without requiring extreme commitment to swings that take way too long. The second and third hits especially are great. It's nice to have such focused attacks in such quick succession. The triangle attack is fittingly strong while needing more time to execute, and the circle attack is especially useful. There's a reason this moveset would eventually become the generic polearm moveset. As for the tonfa, it's as decent as it's always been. Good attacks, good triangle, good circle, stuns enemies. I'll talk about the heat actions in a bit, so I guess that's it for the weapons. What was this chapter about again? I don't know, dude. There's just nothing to these moves. There's a utility, of course, but without any substantive fleshing out, these things just feel like gimmicks, not like mechanics. Not bad, but not quite good. Just nothing. Thankfully, these are the only things I can say of Tanimura's kit that feel thoughtless. But like I said, I do want to talk about his heat action next. Yeah, his one heat action. I want to talk about those before I get into his kit as a whole. There's an important role that they play in how certain things come together, so just, bear with me on this. It's worth saying straight out the gate, Tanimura has some of the best heat actions in this series. Yakuza 4 in general is full of fantastic ones, especially since it was made before RGG had to worry about formatting them in such a way that they could immediately phase back into gameplay. I mentioned it in the Shinada video, but it's so much cooler to have the whole sequence animated, including the enemy slumping over onto the ground. It gives each heat action so much more character and individuality. Anyway, Tanimura. Those weapon heat actions I mentioned earlier are good examples of the kind of staying power his design philosophy had on the series. Both the poles and the tonfas would be mainstays for the rest of the PS3 era, even if they eventually got phased out when the Dragon Engine games took things in a different direction. In addition, these and his other heat actions all showcase that technical fighting prowess I've been stressing for the whole video. I showed that disarming heat action earlier. That's the first instance of a heat action that steals an enemy's weapon in this series, minus the sword disarming one from Kenzan. He also gets the Komaki shot stopper. Lord knows how he learned that. He actually gets a few heat actions straight from Kiryu in one way or another. Of course, he gets the grab reversal and floor heat actions from IF7, he gets a part of Hell's Floor for rising enemies, and even his wall and floor heat actions are the first parts of the ones from 3. In the greater structure of Yakuza 4 though, giving those moves to Tanimura gives a lot of dramatic tension to his existence in the game. With Akiyama, his fighting style and attitude are about as far from Kiryu as you can get. Saejima gets a little bit closer, being a Yakuza and also being serious. And then Tanimura, the story starts picking up in dramatic value, and he gets those heat actions. You think, oh, I'm getting closer and closer to actually being Kiryu. It's a really cool way that Yakuza 4 blends both the gameplay and story into building up the reveal to playing as Kiryu, and him being as powerful as he is doubles down on that dramatic payoff. Beyond those heat actions though, Tanimura gets a few moves that give his core moveset a lot of synergy. He can unlock a heat action out of a parry that automatically puts an enemy into an arm grab. Technically, this fulfills that wishful thinking I was doing earlier, but locking this behind a heat action, which itself you need to unlock through training with Nair, is way too many steps for something that feels pretty essential to his moveset. Aside from that though, he gets a heat action that automatically subdues enemies that are stunned or writhing on the ground. Given the size of his health bar, it makes sense that you'd want to remove players from the field as quickly and efficiently as possible, and beyond him just being a cop, it also fits with his character that he'd pull something this scummy in a street fight. Take advantage of someone who can't fight back and extrajudiciously detain them. I mean, we certainly don't send them to jail after the fight, so I choose to believe they just walk off still wearing the cuffs and someone eventually gets them out of them later. Mind all of that when I tell you that he also gets a heat action that automatically stuns enemies. So now you don't even need a weapon or even a well-timed back sway kick. Just grab an enemy from behind with enough heat for a follow-up heat action, and you've effectively defeated that enemy. That last heat action is gained through a revelation, and much like many other things, revelations are at their arguable peak in Yakuza 4. It's really cool seeing how different protagonists react to the same events and gain different ideas from them. Tanimura gets that stun heat action, but he also gets one to use on enemies in an arm grab, and another that he can attack 2 enemies with at once just by grabbing one enemy from the front, which further strengthens his crowd control capabilities. But I have saved the coolest for last, of course. Tanimura gets a heat action you can activate after each of his finishers, and excepting the final one, all of them can be upgraded through repeated use. They all look fantastic, and I love that they logically follow up on the finisher's actual impact. Even if the second one slightly changes how that finisher usually works if you do it on a smaller enemy. Normally I'm against having tools this easily accessible that can end the fight really quickly, but for one, it's not like upgrading your strength to access the Tiger Drop in Yakuza 6. You can unlock these without having to make fights artificially easier in the process. For 2, it's opt-in. You can unlock the move and still choose not to use it. And for 3, this is Yakuza 4. When the game isn't already way too easy, it's easily got some of the most aggressive enemy AI in the series. I mentioned earlier that enemies can just decide to kill you sometimes, and that wasn't an exaggeration. In this game, I am absolutely fine with having a win button for individual enemies in a situation, and it's doubly important for Tanimura to do that considering his shorter health bar. So yeah, his heat actions are basically perfect for the character he is in the story and the archetype he embodies in combat. With all of that covered, it's about time I get to the thing that brings all of this and more under the same umbrella, and gives Tanimura one of the strongest gameplay identities in the series. The protagonists of Yakuza 4, besides being different shades of Kiryu, are pretty well known for embodying the 4 guardians of the Chinese zodiac. Akiyama for the vermilion bird, Saejima for the white tiger, Kiryu for the blue dragon, and Tanimura for the black tortoise. I mean, they'd better be well known for that. That's what they're called in the game. In the remaster, at least. In the PS3 version, the names get a little bit muddied, but it isn't a major loss for one significant reason. Respectively, they're known as the Wind Phoenix, the Iron-Armed Tiger, the Legendary Blue Dragon, and finally, the Wall. And besides just sounding hard as hell, This is a perfect way of describing Tanimura at peak performance. Let's turn our attention to Yakuza 4's upgrade system. That was a moment of silence for Yakuza 4's upgrade system. What a stroke of genius, like actually. Incentivizing player choice in every possible way, only requiring prerequisite upgrades when it directly feeds into the move you're trying to unlock, and the spirit orbs adding in an extra element of thinking strategically about what you want and when to get it. It's perfect, straight up. And it's here that we can finally see how Tanimura is best played, like an unbreakable wall. The most important part of this playstyle is remaining stationary, and Tanimura gets a lot of reasons to stand still. The two most obvious examples of this are Yellow Dragon Spirit. Oh my god, no, I can't call that. Yellow Dragon Spirit and Bodhisattva Spirit. While with Akiyama, you're dodging around the battlefield, getting in all sorts of different taunts to refill your heat on the fly, Tanimura gets the ability to charge his heat in one spot. Likewise, Bodhisattva Spirit allows him to slowly regain health by standing on the spot. Not in stance, but just plain standing. Both of these skills are best used when you have enemies knocked down or afraid, and for that to happen, you need to constantly be in charge of the situation. Have a bead on every enemy, know where they are and what they're doing. The latter specifically is good for refilling on health in between crowds in Tanimura's 2 long battles. Next, you'll want to use that parry as much as possible. Training with Nair allows you to extend the time you can use it for, but aiding in this is the ability to get extra iframes during its execution, as well as the ability to gain heat every time you parry an enemy. In the event that the parry falls through, your block isn't useless. Tanimura can get not only the Tortoise Spirit upgrade, but also a Regard. When blocking fails, he can get Kamaki Cat reflexes to get up without trouble, as well as the Rising Kick to clear out the immediate vicinity. If all else fails, you're still better off maintaining a defensive mindset. Keep to the distance with his double dodge, weave through attacks with an enhanced quick step, and get behind enemies to punish them with your sway attacks. You're not equipped for a full-on assault, but when you do find an opening, use his Essence of Combos to make sure your spare moments of aggression bear fruit. Use the polearm to attack enemies from a distance, or better yet, use your Tonfa or some other method to stun enemies and remove them from battle instantly with Essence of Arresting. If you can get an enemy into an arm grab, you can upgrade the attacks to do more damage, and even upgrade the throw to keep enemies on the ground for longer, which loops right back into getting your health and heat back. At the end of it all, Tanimura is a well-oiled machine that turns bad guys into piles of broken limbs, but he doesn't do it with raw strength or quick strikes. He does it with extreme tactical precision, the kind that only comes from observing the enemy and letting him put himself right where you want him. It's because of this playstyle that he doesn't get a lot to do with his skills. Had to come up at some point, but yeah, Tanimura gets basically no time to shine in Yakuza 4. He's the only character with a literal nothing chapter, and while he gets 2 long battles, one of them spends most of its runtime in sprint missions or with a giant metal tumor attached to his hand. His boss battle with Sugiyuchi is great, but it comes at the expense of forcing him to fight against a pretty standard Yakuza boss, and that isn't where he shines. Especially considering that Sugiyuchi can just take your parry away if you're not fighting him strategically, it doubly limits your options, and it still requires you to play in a way that isn't conducive to Tanimura's playstyle. It's a good fight, don't get me wrong, but it's good because of story, character interactions, and Sugiyuchi's moveset, not because of what Tanimura's gameplay brings to the table. That said, there is one boss fight where Tanimura's gameplay gets to really shine, and that's with Munakata. I know, you're shocked. People hate this fight with a passion. And that's an understatement. Like, people really hate this fight. They'll joke about how Jingu and Kiwami is stupid hard, which he is, but there's not even any joking when it comes to the final boss of Yakuza 4. It's just complaints about how absurdly, artificially difficult it is. Here's where I stand. It's the final goddamn boss. You're not expecting a challenge? And hey, you realize what this is, right? A giant crowd full of super aggressive enemies? One elusive target hiding behind a bunch of meat shields firing potshots into the fray, guarded by what amounts to the actual final boss of the game? This is more than a callback to Yakuza 1. This is what Tanimura was made for. This is his ideal boss fight. And it's a great fight, no matter what the scrubs say. You have every tool needed to make this fight more than possible. The parry, the arm grab throw, heat actions tied to both of these things, the pole and the tonfa, essence of arresting. When I say every tool, I mean every tool. I've beaten this fight with no health items before. Not for this video, granted, but I have. And it's because of those tools that it was possible. Make no mistake, the fight is still hard, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Again, it's the final boss. Some kind of difficulty was more than welcome by this point, especially in Yakuza 4. When he finds himself in the right situation, Tanimura's gameplay loop is easily one of the best constructed in the entire Yakuza series. Even with the game criminally lacking in those situations, that doesn't take away from how well designed he is. Every part of his moveset feeds into another part to promote one clear and obvious game plan. While that game plan might not be the most dynamic, it is one of the most consistent and effective. Now, there is one more thing I need to address. You've probably been waiting for it, and yeah, it's a bit of a downer, but it's more of a downer than you're expecting. Mild content warning for those who need it. I'm just gonna get straight into it. You've probably noticed by this point that I've been using a mishmash of footage between the original game and the remaster. Normally I try to keep things more consistent, and if I'm playing Yakuza 4 in my downtime, I'm choosing the PS3 version every day of the week. Much like the rest of the trilogy, Yakuza 4 Remastered suffers from a weird dodge, altered enemy AI, and an inferior translation. This is especially true of 4. It's easily got my favorite dialogue in the entire series, but unlike 3 and 5, there is one more massive thing that keeps me away from the remaster. In the PS3 version of the game, Tanimura was played by Hiroki Narimiya. Like most other mocapped actors in this series, he was pretty well known, mostly for his roles on television. After his appearance in this game, he continued a pretty healthy career for a while, including starring in the Ace Attorney live-action movie. He also reprised his role as Phoenix Wright in the 3DS game Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright. This isn't relevant to his role in Yakuza 4, I just love the Professor Layton series, and I was shocked to find out he's been a part of 2 franchises I hold near and dear to my heart. Unfortunately, Narimiya's career wouldn't stay healthy for too long. I'm neither a muckraker nor a drama YouTuber, so I apologize if any of these details are incorrect. In 2016, a friend of his leaked photos of Narimiya to the press, accusing him of cocaine use. You might recognize the magazine Friday as one often featured in convenience stores from the Yakuza games. It's one of those small features that you have no reason to know about, but adds to the realism for the Japanese audience. Said photos contained what was alleged to be cocaine paraphernalia and evidence of Narimiya preparing the drug on a table. While in America that would probably be bragged about by some celebrities, Japan takes drug-related crimes incredibly seriously. An allegation of this nature can destroy someone's career overnight, and that's pretty much exactly what happened to Narimiya. He proved the allegations wrong in more than one way, including a drug test that came up negative, and in confirming that the powder shown in the photo was some kind of candy. Unfortunately, Friday refused to rescind the allegations, and between that and the realization that this leak had come from someone he knew and trusted, Narimiya retired from the industry. For most people, that's probably where the story ends, but my research into this topic did uncover one more unfortunate piece of news. I found an article published in 2016 by Oricon News, which seems to be an organization most focused on delivering statistics in the music industry. Take it or leave it when it comes to the validity of what all I'm about to say. I'm not trying to purport this as true, I'm just trying to purport this as something that has been reported on. In this article, they interviewed the masked wrestler The Great Sasuke, who claimed that Narimiya had sexually assaulted his son about 10 years before Narimiya's retirement. Sasuke also made this allegation publicly on his blog after Narimiya's retirement and well before the interview with Oricon. According to him, the incident occurred after his son and Narimiya had met in a professional setting, and that sometime after the incident, Sasuke's son had been diagnosed with PTSD, for which he was receiving treatment overseas. Sasuke also specified that he didn't want to sue Narimiya, instead saying he wanted the chance to talk with Narimiya's managers. This is a direct quote, but mind the translation is a little dodgy. I think Narimiya is suffering mentally as well. He himself said that he felt betrayed, and I think he is in a state of both physical and mental damage. I believe that that kind of damage will heal with time, so even if he takes a break for now, I hope he will return in the future looking healthy, laughing off the past and saying, "What are you talking about? It's not like that at all." That's how I feel. I don't want him to retire like this. He's a star, isn't he? A star must continue to shine. Again, I'm not a tabloid or a drama channel, nor do I wish to be. But I think it's important not to ignore allegations when they're made, even if they turn out to be false. In this case, I don't really have any way of confirming or denying anything. I can't find any other evidence of this interview or allegation anywhere online, nor about Sasuke's son. But given his statements here, I can only assume that that's on purpose. It should also be mentioned that one of the supposed justifications behind the frame job that forced Narimiya's retirement was a scorned lover, as well as an attempt to publicly out Narimiya as either homosexual or bisexual. As I understand it, he is one of those two things in reality, so that lends some credence to the theory. So for the moment, let's assume that all of this information is true. It's commendable that Sasuke would prioritize healing over comeuppance given the 10-year gap between the incident and Narimiya's retirement. Doubly so considering he apparently didn't want to hurt Narimiya's public image any more than he had to get into contact with his managers. It's a messy situation, especially considering I haven't found anything else to talk about it, but assuming it's true, the lack of animosity from Sasuke and the unrelated frame job obviously don't absolve Narimiya of guilt. It really sucks that this is how I learned the man behind one of my favorite characters in Yakuza is potentially also bisexual. But of course, I prioritize his actions over potential solidarity. This isn't the sort of person I should be happy to have something in common with. Again, in the event that any of this is even true. I want to stress that. I didn't talk about this to convince anyone that it's true. Again, I'd love it if it weren't. But it's important that allegations are talked about. We don't need to believe all of them, but we need to know they exist, otherwise there's no chance for a potential scumbag to be outed. Here's a lesson for everyone watching. Never idolize a celebrity. Everyone has potential skeletons in their closet, and if you wouldn't hold your friend on a pedestal of morality because of things they may have done, then don't hold a stranger to that standard either. You will never understand a celebrity, no matter how much you see them on a screen. It's more than a little awkward to go back into Yakuza 4 after this, but I didn't want to put this section at the beginning of the video for fear of setting a bad tone for the rest of it. That said, I am sorry if this retroactively paints things in a negative light. If you need to take a break or something, feel free to. Do your own research. If I missed something because I'm dumb or because Google didn't want to show me any other Japanese articles, then call me out. Again, I'd love for all of this to be proven false. If you're alright, then let's continue. With Narimiya having retired from the industry and presumably refusing to relicense his likeness to RGG for the remaster of Yakuza 4 in the event that they did want him back at all, they needed a new actor to play Tanimura in the remaster. Thus, the job fell to Toshiki Masuda. He does a fine enough job, and people seem happy with his performance, but I vastly prefer Narimiya's, mainly because of one factor. Narimiya is a TV actor, and Masuda is an anime voice actor. Funny enough, if Yakuza 4 were made today, Masuda would probably be the better choice for Tanimura. That's just where the series has gone in terms of what it best emulates. But seeing as Yakuza 4 emulates crime drama more than it emulates anime, Masuda is left feeling a bit out of place in most scenes involving him. No one else is hamming up the emotions and inflections quite like he is.
Yoshi, koi. Nanda omae? Yoshi, koi.
That one distinction really covers every major difference between them, but there are some finer details that I can highlight. Narimiya is a lot quieter in indoor scenes. He's quieter across the board, really.
25年も経ってるのに変わらない人もいるもんだ。やっと会えた。ずっと探していたんですよ。
It helps accentuate the moments where he raises his voice, especially in the scenes following the Sugiuchi fight.
25年前、俺の親父を荒川に捨てたのは誰なんだ。おい、言え。なんでだよ。なんであんたなんだよ。なんで警察官が警察官を殺さなきゃなんねえんだよ。
With Masuda, his tone is more consistent throughout the entire game, but that means the moments where he's supposed to be more upset feel less impactful because that's the tone he's been using in calmer scenes.
25年も経ってるのに
河原の人もいるもんだ。やっと会えた。ずっと探していたんですよ。
In the Sugiyuchi scene especially, Narimiya sells that emotion a lot better than Masuda does, at least in my opinion.
25年前、俺の親父を荒川に捨てたのは誰なんだ。おい言え。なんでだよ。なんであんたなんだよ。なんで警察官が警察官を殺さなきゃならねえんだよ。
Another major difference between the two is their battle voice lines. Narimiya is a lot more hoarse. He isn't afraid of sounding nasty when he yells. Masuda, like many anime voice actors, uses a much cleaner sounding voice when he yells. I admit I also do have a personal bias for Narimiya's yells. He sounds like a little rat man. I like it a lot. The differences in performance also carry over to their karaoke. Narimiya's performance makes him sound like he'd rather not be there, and I absolutely believe Tanimura would rather be doing anything else, even if he's willing to go there for his date. It fits his character. He doesn't sing the male karaoke songs, and his backup vocals are changed for the songs he technically can sing.
You metal shining cat, yeah! Hey, come on, go, let's go! All right!
With Masuda's Tanimura, I'm left wondering why he isn't just singing the song. He sounds perfectly willing to do so. There's a lot more energy here that doesn't make sense for someone who doesn't enjoy karaoke. Finally, there's the difference in their appearance. Tanimura is often referred to as a pretty boy by various characters in the game, and his original appearance sells that. It also sells a youth that he embodies, as a much younger generation of police officers who will hopefully clean up the department's reputation and internal corruption. Despite looking very young in real life, and despite being the same age as Narimiya when he played Tanimura, Masuda's Tanimura embodies neither youthfulness nor pretty boyness. He's been best described by some as Yuya's cousin, and while Yuya was a host, he was the bouncer for a reason. He isn't very pretty, not like Kazuki pretty at least. All told, I can understand why someone might prefer Masuda's Tanimura. His performance fits in a lot better with the newer games in the series, and it isn't like it's a bad performance. He does a serviceable job. For me, though, there's too many little things wrong with his inclusion to say that I could take either of them. Even besides that, the differences Narimiya brings to the table make his version of the character all the more distinct from the other protagonists in this series. And he is acting this way on purpose. It's not like he's a bad actor. Like I said, he played Phoenix Wright in the Ace Attorney movie. He's capable of raising his voice and hamming it up.
この事件と千尋さんの事件はつながってる。
陰で操ってる奴がいる。こじつけだ。
異議あり。
He played Tanimura this way because it fits his character. The fact that he doesn't feel like the average Yakuza protagonist is a part of why I like Tanimura so much. He's more reserved, he's more composed, more morally gray, but he still knows evil when he sees it. And he's willing to fight that evil no matter where it is, no matter what it takes. He more than earns his spot among the Yakuza 4, the real Yakuza 4. And even if he never shows up again, Masuda or otherwise, I'll always hold Tanimura in high regard as one of the best characters in this series. So yeah, there's your Tanimura video. He's not the most stylish character, and he's certainly not the strongest, but he more than makes up for both of those surface level flaws. He has access to such a diverse range of tools, all of which have their place in his kit, and despite some of those tools being a bit too shallow for my taste, that doesn't negate their efficacy in combat. Not only that, his presentation in the game's story lines up perfectly with his fighting style, his heat actions, his mannerisms on the battlefield, and the strategies that his kit encourages you to embrace in fights. He may not be perfect, but he's interesting. That's exactly what I want out of a character and a fighter in a Yakuza game. Now, when it comes to the actual ranking, and mind that these scores are specifically considering the PS3 version of the game. Presentation gets a 2 out of 3. The visual and audio components of playing as Tanimura are great across the board, his heat actions are excellent, and his fighting style is coherent and consistent. The only reason it isn't perfect is, again, because of that stupid fucking down attack. Call it a nitpick if you want, but it's a choice that not only looks bad, but hampers you in combat by being too slow. So that choice has an actual negative effect on your gameplay experience. Utility, 3 out of 3. Tanimura's kit is pretty much perfect for what his chapters and fights require of him in Yakuza 4. In any other game, his moveset wouldn't be optimal, but here, it's exactly what he needs. Fun, 2 out of 3. That said, while his moveset is all around useful, the lack of additional options given to the parry and arm grab make them feel more like utilities than cool moves you can use. That and his stationary playstyle can eventually get rather boring in long spurts, but that's only from extended exposure, so I don't think it's worth taking too much off for. Lunarrative synchronicity, absolutely present, both in his choice of fighting style and how his moveset reflects his character traits and actions. When you're playing as Tanimura, it feels like you're actually playing as him, not as his stunt double who happens to be incredible at martial arts he has no reason to be using. All told, Tanimura gets an 8 out of 10, sliding comfortably into second place between Shinada and Agent style. Not too shabby, especially considering I was a little worried going into this video that I would find some horrible repressed experience that would make him suck. But nope, he's just an overall positive character and an overall great game. Anyway, thanks a ton for watching. I know this was a bit of a departure from the other style analysis videos, but if I really am going to talk about every playable style in this series, and I want to so much, I think it's best to give my ideas some structure to organize them around. And to those who wanted more story talk, I am sorry I didn't provide here. If I didn't satiate your thirst, there will be a poll up pretty soon offering some potential video ideas to come after I wrap up the other things I've got slated to come out next. For now, though, expect some videos about external Yakuza media, and maybe some extra goodness thrown in there. Like 3 people that watch the Let's Plays, maybe you'll get more of that. We'll see how it goes. That's all for now. I hope you have a good day. Take care of yourself.